Wyatt's return isn't framed as a homecoming, and it certainly isn't a sentimental reunion meant to mend old fractures. It arrives like a slammed door in a quiet house, sharp, unavoidable, and full of intent. For a long time, silence has been the family's favorite weapon. It can preserve a name, protect a legacy, and keep the public fooled long enough for the next scandal to wash the last one away. But Wyatt comes back with a different purpose. He isn't here to negotiate peace. He's here to end the performance. In his eyes, the story of Luna's death was never a clean tragedy, never an isolated accident that could be mourned and then filed away. It was the final consequence of a pattern choices made behind closed doors, protections granted to the wrong people, and a powerful man's belief that control is the same thing as responsibility. The most devastating part of Wyatt's accusation is that he doesn't need to claim Bill pulled a trigger or planted a knife. He claims something harder to deny and more poisonous to the truth, that Bill didn't have to touch Luna to be involved in her ending. Wyatt paints Bill as a man who didn't kill with his hands, but with decisions, cold calculations wrapped in paternal authority. Business instinct dressed up as damage control, and the reflex to shield, redirect, and manage fallout instead of confronting it. Luna, in Wyatt's version of events, wasn't simply a victim of fate. She became a ticking device assembled over time, each protective lie tightening the casing, each strategic cover-up shortening the fuse. Even if Bill never intended for the explosion, Wyatt insists Bill still built the conditions for it, then stood close enough to feel the heat while insisting his hands were clean. And that is where the emotional cruelty deepens. Bill's entire identity is built on the belief that he can outmaneuver consequences. He can outspend them, outact them, or outweight them. He can hold his public image like a shield, polished, practiced, and always angled towards sympathy. When the world looks his way, he offers the version of himself it's easiest to accept. A complicated man, maybe reckless, maybe ruthless, but ultimately untouchable. The problem is that Wyatt isn't speaking to the public. He's speaking to the private ruins behind the image, to the rooms where I did what I had to do becomes an excuse that rots into something worse. Wyatt has lived to long inside those contradictions, watching the same charisma that comforts outsiders suffocate the people closest to Bill. Wyatt's warning lands with a terrifying precision because it doesn't sound like revenge. It sounds like inevitability. Bill may still believe that Luna's death is the end of the story, one last tragic chapter that can be sealed with grief, an expensive funeral, and a carefully managed narrative. Wyatt doesn't allow him that comfort. He draws a line between what the world can forget and what reality refuses to erase. He reminds Bill that some truths don't stay buried simply because the family agrees not to talk about them. Some truths don't even need a witness in court. They just need time, pressure, and the one thing Bill can't buy back, the moral weight of what he enabled. Then Wyatt reveals the detail that changes everything, not as a twist for shock value, but as a brutal anchor that keeps the accusation from floating away. The baby he is raising isn't simply a vulnerable life that needs protection. In Wyatt's mind, the child is proof. Proof that the past is not finished. Proof that Luna's story is not a closed case. Proof that what Bill tried to hide didn't die with her. A child is the opposite of silence breathing, growing, demanding answers. And if Bill believed that loss could erase liability, Wyatt is making it clear that this child will do the opposite. It will force the family to stare at what they tried to blur. And it will force Bill to face the consequences he spent his life dodging. Wyatt's internal conflict is what gives the confrontation its heat. Because this isn't only about punishing Bill, it's about surviving Bill. Wyatt doesn't return as a detached judge. He returns as a son who understands the seduction of Bill's logic and the terror of it. He knows how easy it is to be pulled back into the orbit, to accept the half-truths because they're less painful than the full story, to let love become a reason to forgive what should never be repeated. But he also knows what it costs. He's seen how Bill's protection can feel like safety until it becomes a cage. He's seen how loyalty can be weaponized, how family becomes a contract that demands silence as payment. Coming back means risking everything: the fragile stability he has built, the child's future, even his own identity as someone who once tried to believe Bill could change. Yet he comes anyway because he has decided that the most dangerous thing isn't conflict, it's denial. And that is why his final message hits like a threat and a vow at the same time. If Bill thought everything could be buried with Luna, he was wrong. Wyatt is standing in the doorway of Bill's carefully managed life, holding the one thing Bill cannot spin into irrelevance. The child is not just a responsibility, it is a living reminder that every secret leaves a residue, every cover-up creates a chain, and every decision made to protect the family eventually demands its price. Wyatt has not returned to ask Bill to confess. He has returned to tell him the era of silent forgiveness is over and that the proof Bill feared most is already in Wyatt's arms, waiting for the truth to catch up. Wyatt didn't take the baby in because it made him look noble, or because he wanted to play the hero in a story that had already bled too much. He did it because at the moment it mattered, Bill didn't speak to him like a tyrant or a legend or a man used to getting his way. Bill spoke like someone cornered by an invisible threat. He begged, not with tenderness, but with urgency sharpened into something almost panicked, as if the world had suddenly grown teeth. Bill's request wasn't wrapped in explanations or softened by honesty. It was a simple command disguised as a plea: keep a living soul safe, because if the wrong name ever surfaced, there would be people who would hunt the child without mercy. Wyatt remembers the way Bill said it, to controlled for a father, to precise for a man in grief, like someone reciting a plan he'd rehearsed for the worst day of his life. And Wyatt, against his better instincts, agreed, because even when you distrust a man, you can still be undone by the sight of him afraid. At first, Wyatt told himself it was only protection, a temporary measure, a moral obligation that didn't require him to understand the full nightmare behind it. He imagined faceless danger out there, imagined that Bill's warning came from genuine fear rather than strategy. But the longer he lived with the weight of the baby's safety, every late-night check, every flinch at an unfamiliar car, every instinct to scan a room before he entered it, the more the story began to feel wrong. Not because the threat wasn't real, but because Bill's motives were too carefully arranged around it. Bill didn't simply want the child protected, he wanted the child hidden. He wanted the child insulated from names, from documents, from anything that could form a trail. The secrecy wasn't the kind that comes from love. It was the kind that comes from liability. That is where Wyatt's suspicion starts to rot through him, slow and relentless. He begins to wonder if the baby isn't only a target for strangers, but a danger to Bill himself. A living thread that still ties Bill to Luna, to what happened before she died, to the private choices that might have turned tragedy into something darker. Wyatt can't stop the questions from multiplying. Why would a child's identity be lethal if the past was truly clean? Why would Bill's fear spike at the idea of the truth surfacing unless the truth had teeth? And most importantly, why did Bill need Wyatt, specifically Wyatt, to carry this burden? Not a lawyer, not security, not some paid guardian bound by contracts and silence, but Wyatt, the one person whose conscience could be leveraged with the language of family and protection. Wyatt begins to see the shape of the trap he walked into. The baby is not just someone he is raising. The baby is evidence he is sheltering, whether he intends to or not. The child's existence forces Wyatt into a posture of secrecy, and secrecy forces complicity. It turns every day into a quiet negotiation with fear, and every decision into a question of who he is really protecting. The terrifying possibility emerges that Bill didn't place the baby in his care as an act of trust, but as an act of insurance, because if the situation ever detonates, Wyatt will already be holding the most sensitive piece. Wyatt will already be the one who hid the child, moved the child, guarded the child. Wyatt will already have fingerprints all over the story, even if he never touched the crime. And then comes the darker thought, the one Wyatt hates himself for having, because it makes him feel like he's betraying the infant he loves. What if this was never just protection? What if it was also leverage? A silent arrangement in which the baby's safety is the currency and Wyatt's obedience is the price. The more Wyatt examines Bill's urgency, the more he realizes how convenient it is for Bill to keep the child close to someone who still carries the lingering ache of wanting to believe in him. If Bill ever needs Wyatt to stay quiet, he doesn't have to threaten him directly. He only has to remind him that danger exists, that predators are watching, that exposure would be catastrophic. In that scenario, the baby becomes both shield and chain, something Wyatt would die to protect, and something Bill can use to keep Wyatt within reach. The conflict inside Wyatt sharpens because love doesn't feel like love anymore. It feels like surveillance. He loves the baby in the plane, human way through sleepless nights, through the instinctive tenderness that rises when a small hand curls around his finger, through the fierce protectiveness that makes him feel more awake than he has in years. Yet alongside that love is a growing awareness that he might be parenting inside a lie, that he might be raising a child whose very identity is a detonator, and that he is being kept in the dark on purpose. Wyatt realizes he is trapped between two moral terrors. If he walks away, he endangers an innocent life. If he stays, he may be enabling something he can't see, something that could be as calculated as it is cruel. What haunts him most is how quickly he became a piece on someone else's board. He wasn't given the full truth. He was handed urgency and asked to call it trust. He was handed fear and asked to call it duty. And now, as the questions about Luna's death circle closer, he begins to understand that Bill's warning about people hunting the child could mean many things: criminal enemies, vengeful relatives, desperate opportunists, but it could also mean something far more intimate: the past itself, hunting for a way to be revealed. Wyatt can feel the walls closing in around a story he doesn't fully know, yet can't escape because an innocent heartbeat is at the center of it. He recognizes, with a chill that sinks into his bones, that he has been pulled into a plan that can be described as protection or as blackmail, and the difference depends on a truth Bill refuses to give him. And as Wyatt stares at the baby, he realizes the cruelest part. The child isn't just the reason he has to fight. The child is also the reason Bill believes Wyatt will never dare to.